King Henry VIII was one of the most famous rulers in all the world, but how well do you know him? Here are 10 surprising facts about King Henry VIII. Number 10. He was a fun-minded ruler. It's very easy to think that all rulers of all nations have to be serious and focused in order to rule the country. But with King Henry VIII, he was kind of a different story. While he was a capable ruler, he also preferred to have fun. For example, he was actually a late riser and didn't want to be disturbed until 8 a.m., which is not something you'd associate with a king. Usually they were up at the crack of dawn or before, so 8 a.m. was sleeping in. I mean, not for me, but… Once he woke up, he would avoid his kingly duties for as long as possible and would usually go hunting to get some exercise and have fun with his friends, or go and train some hawks, which was a popular practice back then. Anything to avoid having to govern 24/7. Don't get me wrong, of course he would make time for ruling the country, but it was always pleasure over business. Maybe why he had 6 wives. He would find time to squeeze in his duties between his morning and evening activities, which usually would sound like it could backfire, but King Henry VIII actually had a very sharp mind and memory, allowing him a more leisurely style of ruling. And you could forget about asking him questions in the evening. This is when he would have parties, go dancing, gambling, and play cards with his favorites. So he may have been a famous king, but you could also say that he was famous at having fun as well. Number 9. He wasn't supposed to be king. When it comes to next in line for the throne, it is always the firstborn son. In the case of Henry VIII, he was in fact the second son and was raised as such. You might have already known this, but many people forget. For most of his young life, he was often ignored by his father, who was often with his older brother Arthur. It was Arthur who was engaged to Catherine of Aragon, who would later become Henry's first wife. And it was Arthur who got the best tutors and was often included in his father's meetings, not Henry. However, not uncommon in those times, Arthur got sick and died at the age of 15. So when Henry VIII was just 17, he was crowned the King of England and became the second Tudor monarch that the country had ever had. He ruled for 38 years until his death. Number 8. He was athletic. Another thing that is often associated with kings and monarchs are their frames or their physical build, basically if they were fat or skinny. Many aren't depicted as athletic or refined. Even though portraits were made to make people look good, kings were known for getting lax and fat when they get on the throne, but not Henry VIII. He was actually very athletic and he enjoyed doing outdoor activities like hunting and hawking. Even though his most famous portraits show him as stout and fat, he was famous in his time for being very lean and very toned, especially in his legs. Men having shapely legs was very sexy at that time. He apparently was quite the looker too. He was such an eyeful that someone was quoted as saying that he was the handsomest potentate I have ever set eyes on, even going so far as to label him an Adonis, a Greek figure known to be lover of Aphrodite and seen as the epitome of mortal beauty. The person went on to note his legs were extremely well toned, with an extremely fine calf to his leg. His complexion was very fair, and his round face was said to be so beautiful that it would even look good on a woman. High praise indeed. Sadly for him, it didn't last. In his 40s, while jousting, he severely injured his leg. Everyone said the king shouldn't have been jousting anyway, but he also loved to show off. His leg never properly healed, and it hurt him until the day he died. This injury is what led to him to gain so much weight. Plus, he ate a ton and he stopped exercising. His waist was noted to have gone from 32 inches around, which was pretty fair for a guy his build, to 52 inches. A portrait was made of him being winched onto a horse so that he could ride it, and it's because of this portrait that not many people know that he was quite the handsome figure in his day. The show The Tudors had it right for a while in that aspect. Number 7. He was a sophisticated eater. Another portrait that has haunted the image of King Henry VIII is one of him eating a meal and then subsequently throwing a chicken leg over his head to show that he was done with it. This seemed to paint him as a messy eater, but in fact this was not the case. He was actually a rather picky eater, not necessarily in the meals he ate, but how he ate them. For example, when he ate, he would usually like to do it alone, so that he could do all sorts of rituals and ceremonies before digging in. He would wash his hands before every meal, as well as during the meal and then after it. He was very cautious and detail-minded when he ate, so much so that the only time he held massive feasts, despite what portraits say, was when he had a royal guest, like a formal dignitary. Now, one thing that was true was that he liked to pick and choose what he ate. Every meal given to him was a variety, and he could choose what he wanted that day. Excessive, but he was king after all. Number 6. His love life. Easily one of the most famous things about Henry VIII is that he had a lot of wives and mistresses. In fact, you could argue that it's the most known thing about him, and that would have suited him just fine. He was known to be very exacting on what he wanted from women, which is why he had 6 official wives and numerous mistresses. With Anne Boleyn, when he finally got her into his bed, he was a bit shocked that she seemed a little too experienced for his liking. This wasn't really a problem until she could not provide him with an heir, and his love turned to hatred. So he went on to another mistress who became his wife, Jane Seymour, who was known to be very quiet and demure, perhaps the opposite of Anne Boleyn, and she was able to provide him with an heir. In case you have trouble remembering all of his wives, here's a fun little rhyme that happily states their fates. King Henry VIII. To 6 wives he was wedded, 1 died, 1 survived, 2 divorced, 2 beheaded. That's accurate, but there is one thing to note. His very first wife, Catherine of Aragon, the one who was supposed to marry Arthur, was married to him for a very long time. They were married for 22 years, which is actually more than every other marriage length combined. So what happened? They had a daughter named Mary, and she would be queen later on, but he wanted a son and began to hate Catholicism, mostly because he was very swayed by Anne Boleyn and her family's religious beliefs. He wanted his marriage to Catherine annulled based on the fact that Catherine was unable to give him a male heir. When the Pope refused, he divorced her, was excommunicated by the Pope, and he started the Church of England, and married Anne Boleyn. We all know that didn't end well for her. Number 5. He wrote a religious book. The time of King Henry VIII was very much one defined by faith and the Catholic Church. So when Martin Luther wrote a book called 95 Theses that openly challenged the beliefs and practices of the Catholic Church, a lot of people were shocked. One of them was King Henry VIII. He was not only a Catholic himself at the time, but he believed in the power of the Church and the Pope. So what did he do? He wrote a book called Defense of the Seven Sacraments, which is a reference to the Catholic Church and their practices. When it released in 1521, it was a big hit with the people, and naturally the Church. The Pope himself was so moved by what King Henry VIII wrote, he bestowed upon him the title of Defender of the Faith. Very apt given the content of the book. I bet he regretted that later. 2 points to note here. 1, King Henry VIII was the first English king to actually write and publish a book. Second, the book wasn't small. It had 30,000 words in it, so this wasn't a simple attempt to defend the Church like in a brochure. It was a well-articulated argument that backed up his beliefs. He probably later regretted that too when he wanted to get his marriage to Catherine annulled. Number 4. He killed more people than any other monarch. As he got older, King Henry VIII became a very bitter man. He started getting paranoid that someone was going to try and kill him. Plus, his health was starting to fail between his leg injury and severe gout that he had from his diet. Between not feeling well and his paranoia, he ordered numerous executions and imprisonments, to the extent that the Tower of London was packed with the people he ordered detained. As these imprisonments led to deaths, he quickly gained quite a tally. In total, he executed more people, not including wartime casualties, than any monarch before or since. One of the more infamous executions was that of Margaret de la Pole, a countess who was 67 years old. Henry was terrified that she and her family could arguably have a claim to the throne. She tried to flee her execution, and the executioner wasn't well versed with the axe. It took 11 swings for her to die. Henry began to turn from a handsome, beloved man to a scary tyrant. Number 3. He knew a lot about medicine. With a sharp mind, King Henry VIII learned about many different subjects, including medicine. After a while, he refused to see physicians unless necessary because he felt he knew enough about medicine to self-medicate and diagnose himself. Plus, physicians during that time had some questionable practices. In fact, not only did he write a book about how to treat ailments that he had, he would also make his own concoctions to help find new cures. Whether these worked as intended is a bit up for debate, but it's clear that something had to work, or else I don't think he would have kept doing it, or written them down. Number 2. He's still a mystery to historians. One of the biggest mysteries about King Henry VIII is his big personality shift during the later years of his life and reign. He became evil, tyrannical, and had many people executed and tortured, whether they deserved it or not. But despite some evidence pointing to certain reasons why, no one really knows why the shift happened. For example, the injury to his leg and his gout that led him to gaining so much weight is one popular theory. This may have made him bitter as he couldn't do the things that he loved, and maybe his self-esteem dropped. But would a simple injury lead him to becoming such a tyrant? Plus, the change didn't happen immediately, it happened well after the injury itself. Another popular theory is Mc-Lloyd syndrome, which is a cognitive impairment. This may be backed up by the trouble he had having children with his numerous wives. However, he actually did have many children. The problem was that a lot of them didn't survive. There's no real way of knowing. So while King Henry VIII was a very versatile and well-documented king, the reasoning for his personality change is a mystery lost to time. Number 1. He may have written Greensleeves. On a happier note, King Henry VIII had a lot of hobbies, and one of them was music. He was a well-known composer and has been documented as having written songs such as Hélas Madame and Pastimes with Good Company. But what might be even more shocking is that he may have been the composer behind the popular song Greensleeves. It's very much up for debate, mind you, but there are some who wholeheartedly believe that he wrote it in order to try and woo future mistress/wife Anne Boleyn. Clearly it worked. Regardless, he did write songs and he had quite an assortment of musical instruments, including 78 flutes, 78 recorders, 5 bagpipe sets, and a harpsichord. A man of many facets and hidden talents. Thanks for watching! I hope you learned something new about King Henry VIII. Feel free to share any other fun facts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe and I'll see you soon. Bye!